Hey there, we have got just less than a minute. Oops, no, we don't. We are right on the dot of 5 o'clock Mountain Time. So good to have you with me today. Thank you for making time in your busy schedules to be with me today. I would love it if you would take just a moment and say hello to me in the chat box. I really value interaction, and I'm going to be asking questions and asking for people to post comments in that chat box. So I'd just love you to kind of get to know where that chat box is and how to use it. Take just a moment to say hello. That would be so good. While you're saying hello, I would love to know, if you don't mind, if you would just share with me, do you have any iridology background? Oh, and you know what? You might be trying, and I forgot to finish the setup here. There we go. Now you should be able to say hello and tell me what your iridology background is. Okay. And there's Jack saying hello. She's one of my grads. So good to have you with us today, Jack. Thanks for being there. I know what her background is. And Peggy is another one of my grads. So she's also saying yes. And she's got some background in constitutional, of course. Allison has no iridology background. Oh, I'm so glad you're here. Debbie has a Jensen background. Debbie, we're going to challenge some of your thought beliefs. All right. And I'm so glad you're here for that. We'll do it gently. We'll do it with love, I promise. Who else would like to weigh in on this? It's just so good to see you here, and I appreciate you interacting. Patricia said Jensen in 93. Welcome, Patricia. Good to have you with us too. Okay, I'm sure there are more people dropping comments, so we will just let them keep typing. Linda from Lancaster, always looking forward to learning new things. So good to have you with us. Alicia, Jensen in the 90s. Okay, very good. Very good. Well, we're going to challenge some beliefs, like I said, and it's really good for me to see where you're coming from, because then I can possibly anticipate some questions you might have. I do want to put your mind at ease. I'm not selling anything in this particular class, right? So if you brought your credit card with you, just put it away. You're not going to need it. We are going to do a deep dive into the science and the art of the practice of iridology. And I encourage you, if you've got a question or comment, just go ahead and drop them into that chat box. I appreciate so much those of you who have dropped comments in there already. And if the question is appropriate to where we're at, I will try to work it into the conversation. Give me just a moment, if you would, to let me introduce myself here. My name is Judith Cobb. I am a certified level 3 iridology instructor. That's with the International Iridology Practitioners Association. IPA doesn't make us do anything, I guess. IPA gives us the opportunity to maintain our credentials by providing proof that we are staying up to date in iridology. And so when we do that, they give us a new badge every 2 years. So I have been an iridologist and an instructor for far more than just 2 years. I guess I'm coming up on needing to submit my recertification credentials. But I've been actually in the holistic healing world for over 4 decades. And I have taught and designed many, many classes, everything from herbs to nutrition to iridology to pregnancy to children to you name it, biokinesiology, color therapy, all kinds of things. And so, in addition to being an iridologist, I am also a master herbalist and a nutrition professional. And so I'm associated with the Canadian Association of Holistic Nutrition Professionals and the Canadian Association of Natural Nutritional Practitioners and the Alberta Herbalist Association. So when I am doing an iris assessment, I am always integrating my nutrition and my herbology with whatever I'm doing with my clients. So today, as we talk about the science and the art of iridology, there is a lot we are going to cover. We're going to try to do it in 90 minutes and be done by 6:30 my time. I don't know what time that will be for most of you. We are going to look at the history of the development of this science of iridology, because when we understand the history, we'll understand why there are so many different perspectives in iridology. Then we're going to look at the anatomy of the eye, because in order to do iridology, we need to understand the anatomy. And then, as I promised you, we're going to look at 4 specific benefits of using iridology in your health coaching business. Now, I would love to know, just a show of hands, how many of you use iridology in a professional way where you're working with clients? If you're doing that, just do the little hand raise icon, or, if you can't find that, because I can never find things like that, just put pro in the chat box, and then I know who has been using it professionally. We're going to look at how iridology, how it helps you to get rid of your long intake questionnaires. And we're going to look at how it can help you to create programs that are much easier for your clients to follow. We're going to look at how it can help you to get your programs created in your client sessions. And we're going to look at how it will help you with your client retention. And that's a real thing that a lot of holistic health pros struggle with, is finding ways to have their clients want to come back for repeat sessions. So we are going to be talking about each of those things, maybe not really specifically directly, but you will see it infiltrate what we're talking about as we go. Just want to share with you something that one of my grads said. This is Karen Cho. She is a certified natural health professional, and she specializes in gut health. I asked in our private group, how has learning constitutional iridology helped you in your business? And this is a really important question. You don't necessarily, where's the value in learning something if it's not going to be of benefit to you and your clients, right? You don't want to just take a course to take a course. That's time and money, and it might be fun to learn, but better if it can be of benefit. Karen said, iridology has helped me to understand the relationships between the different organs and organ systems more in depth. Iridology also gives me an advantage of seeing the potential for different genetic traits and qualities that may be underlying. By observing the constitution, for example, you can extrapolate how the person's body will likely respond to applications of healing methods. Therefore, it has helped me to expand my knowledge and increased efficiency at providing more precise recommendations for health-oriented options. I really, really like that. That is what iridology should be doing for us. So let's do a quick tour of the history of iridology. Iridology has its roots in ancient cultures: Egypt, India, China, Greece. Like so many of our wonderful health sciences come from these traditions. Lakita, it's good to see you. I haven't seen you in a long time. Welcome. We once thought that the earth was flat, right? But we know that science evolves. We know that science isn't really about answers. It's about asking the right questions. And we now know, by asking the right questions, that the earth is not flat, it is round. And the problem with this is there are still some people who do think it's flat. They're not willing to consider what the current research is to modify their own answers and their own perspective. Now, it's true that all science evolves. In just about every field of science, what was once embraced as a truth has given way to research and new discoveries, right? And good science will continue to do this. Science will continue to evolve. Good scientists will actually continue to drive every science forward. Science is the art of asking questions that make us do research, that give us another layer of information that makes us ask more questions. We don't know everything yet. How many of you, and let's have the word owl in the chat box, how many of you have heard the owl story? Ignaz van Petzl. Let's see the word owl in the chat box if you've heard this story. A few of you have? Yeah, that's all? Yeah, okay. So 11-year-old boy in Hungary finds traps, somehow comes across an owl that has a broken limb, wing, leg. I've heard so many different variations of the story. And it says as a young boy, he was able to capture this owl, take it home to nurse it back to health. And he noticed that the owl had a dark line in its eye. And that as he nursed this owl back to health, that dark line disappeared. Now, perhaps he did see a line appear and disappear. We'll never know. But what we know is there's a couple of things. Number one, it's never been replicated. You would think that if that had actually happened, that in a bird sanctuary, in a zoo, in a situation where wild birds are brought in, the damaged, injured birds are brought in and they're rehabilitated, that somebody would have noticed something like this, right? But it's never been replicated. The second thing is a bird's eye, the surface of the bird's eye has a different structure as compared to that of a human. So we can't extrapolate straight across anyways. Maybe it could happen in a bird's eye, but it's our eyes are different. So we can't take that straight across. So the most important thing about this story isn't did he see it or not? It's that it made him curious enough for him to wonder about human eyes and what human eyes could say. He actually went on to become a medical doctor and would work with his patients where he would hand sketch their eyes in colored charcoals, and then he would write their story. And he gradually began to see patterns of certain symptoms often had something happening in this one part of the eye. And so we're grateful that whatever he saw spurred him on. Ellen Jensen mentions what Ignaz's uncle August said. Even August von Petschle recognized years later that Ignaz was looking at an owl's eye and not that of a human, and that he did not have the proper equipment to prove what had been recorded in the stories. And Ellen goes on to say it's time for iridology to move forward based on sound research rather than hearsay. And a lot of us feel that way, that we need to be moving forward. But we are so grateful that he started the work, that he started to record things. We now know that the bulk of what we see in an iris is indicating genetic potential. We'll talk about that when we do some case studies later on. Pastor Neil Liljeqvist from Stockholm, Sweden, he correctly identified that the density of the fiber correlates to the overall resistance to disease. We call it now constitutional strength. And so the more threads there are, the more fibers there are per square inch, the more innate ability this body has to resist disease or to recover after disease. When we have gaps and looser fiber structure, this is a body that has to work much harder to stay well and to ward off disease. He also said that the eyes would change in response to toxic exposure. So he would have said that these different pigments that we see in the eye, the different colors that are not the same as the base color, are the result of toxic exposure. We now understand that this is melanin, and it is actually not the result of toxic exposure. It doesn't show us this body needs cleansing. It shows us genetically a couple of other pieces of information, like which organ genetically wants to be out of balance and which organs are going to likely bear the brunt of that. Emanuel Thalke, he was in Germany and he started laying the foundation of mapping as well. He also taught iridology, and he started with also defining the different constitutions that we are going to look at today. We're not going to necessarily name them, but we certainly will be looking at them. There's an institute in Germany called the Thalke Institute that teaches iridology. Now, it's interesting to note that in Germany, only chiropractors, which is the rough equivalent of a naturopath, and medical doctors are allowed to use iridology. It is seen as a very powerful assessment tool. Then we have Rudolf Schnabel, also in Germany. All of this research going on there in Central Europe. He researched more on pigment. So if we see the different colors that are different from the base color of the eye, and pupil tonus. And by that, we mean the size and shape of the pupil, because not all pupils are round. He was also the first to use a microscope to examine the iris. Exciting, and that certainly led the way for us to be able to look at an iris from much closer up. Rudolf Schnabel said even back then, it was no easy task. And those who believe or would like to believe that handling iridoscopy, which is what they used to call iridology, can be learned within a few days or weeks, or a few weeks or even days, are mistaken and do a disservice to a good cause. I totally agree with him that trying to learn iridology in a 2 or 3 or even a 5 or a 6 day course is not going to teach you what you actually need to know to use this well clinically. Now, those of you who are already trained might be squirming a little bit, and I apologize, but I'm going to, as we go through, you'll see why I say that. Joseph Ungerer, also in Germany, he was a study of Schnabel's. He studied under Dr. Schnabel. He became a naturopath, and he was concerned because it seems that everybody who was doing research they weren't pooling their information. They were each doing their own research. They were coming up with their own names for different markings, their own ways of describing things, and it was leading to a lot of confusion. He knew that students were reading books and accepting the printed word about iridology before adequate research was completed. So when he was ready to publish his work, he did not publish it until it had been analyzed and reviewed by his professional peers. He wanted to make sure that it was good, that it wasn't just one man's opinion, but that other people could prove what he had written about. I really like that kind of integrity. Then we have Joseph Deck. He was also an iridology researcher and an instructor, and he pioneered iridology photography. I just think he looks like a 1950s movie star. Theodor Kriege said this: I hope that a later generation will succeed in establishing a single uniform system. In spite of zealous efforts, these have so far not succeeded. Now, Kriege studied with Ungerer, Deck, and Schnabel, so he had some of the original researchers as his teachers. And he felt that iridology was an amazing assessment tool, that it was complemented well by urine analysis, hand analysis, fingernail analysis, tongue and feces analysis. And like all of them, it was an assessment tool. And he felt the more assessment tools you had that were coming up with the same answers, the more likely you were on the right path, which makes complete and total sense, right? Then we have Bernard Jensen, whom many of you have referenced already. I never did have the privilege of meeting him, but I've heard wonderful things about him. Now, what we love about Bernard is he kept iridology alive during the Cold War era, after World War II, when all this research was still ongoing in Germany and in Russia and in Italy, and none of that information was coming across to North America. Bernard took the basic information that he already had, and he kept iridology alive. He did a lot of good for a lot of people. Certainly will never take that away from him. And I've heard he was just a lovely man. Some of you probably did have the opportunity to meet him and probably did know how fabulous he was. And then we have in the 1980s, Harry Wolff, who was an American-born German. He got his hands on a German copy of one of Deck's books about iridology, and he started studying it, and he kind of, whoa, this is way cool. And he connected with Bill Cardona, who at the time was a registered pharmacist, and they started touring around teaching iridology based on this Joseph Deck book. Bill was my constitutional teacher, and he did go on to become a naturopath. He has a busy practice in Seattle, and I am still in touch with him. And I have recently connected with Harry just 4 or 5 years ago, so very cool stuff. Let's talk quickly about Jensenian, Rayid, and constitutional iridology, and do a little bit of a compare and contrast. Jensenian iridology was originally taught by Bernard Jensen. He taught that the iris changes when the body changes, that when you get healing happening when you do the right things. You will see new fibers build in the eyes, and that those were called healing lines. That the shape of a lacuna, the size and shape would change as the person healed. I originally did study Jensenian iridology. That's what I did for about the first 10 years of my practice. I studied with someone who was a first generation Jensenian. She had studied with him a couple of times. Traditional Jensenian iridologists have often done iris readings cold with no background and no information from the client. They basically use the eyes and just deduce what is wrong by looking at the eyes, and then they pronounce the program or the cure or the remedy, or however you want to describe that. Now, with Bernard's passing, just before Bernard passed, a few years prior to that, Bill Cardona and Harry Wolf held a symposium. They invited Bernard to come, Bernard Jensen, and they gave him a Lifetime Achievement Award. And they recognized him for the fabulous work he had done in keeping iridology alive. And in his acceptance, he said to them that he very much supported the work they were doing to move iridology forward, and he wished them all the success in the world to keep iridology alive, keep it moving forward, and keep it developing as a science. And I think that was just generous on both sides, and so nice to see that there was no infighting at all, that they just really wanted the best of iridology for everybody. Now, the traditional Jensen iridologists who are trained by Bernard have a very different approach from the iridologists who are trained by Bernard's daughter-in-law, Ellen. Ellen has taken much of Bernard's original work and has updated it to reflect the constitutional teachings that we're going to look a little bit at as we go through today. Rayid iridology, which is also in some circles known as emotional iridology or behavioral iridology, teaches that emotional traits are genetic and are revealed by markings in the irides. Readings for this type of iridology can be done cold, and information gathered from the irides may be combined with personal and family history information for interpretation. This can be very, very powerful to give you insight into your clients, into the way your client thinks. Helps you to reach them more quickly and at a deeper level so that you can help them achieve better success. This was founded by Denny Johnson, and he started working on Rayid. He had no idea that there was this other kind of iridology that looked at the eyes for the physical traits it could teach us about. Denny has really developed and evolved his Rayid, and Jim Burgess does behavioral iridology, and John Andrews does emotional iridology, I believe is what he calls it in England. So there's a lot of people exploring and developing the emotional personality side of things, which is very exciting. It's lovely to have that complementary side of things. Then we have constitutional. Constitutional iridology originated with Joseph Deck and others, and we've met those others. It's used by MDs in Italy, Germany, and Russia. And there are correlative medical studies being done. There was one that was a study that was started, I think, about 5 years ago that made some very interesting discoveries by having the patients. This was in a naturopath's office in California. He would have his patients do genetic testing, looking for a particular anomaly, and he would document what he saw in their eyes, and he was able to come up with a very high correlation of this anomaly shows up when we see this particular kind of marking. And so really exciting to have that. In constitutional, we teach that the eyes are a reflection of the genetic structure of the body, the inherent potential of the body. So the eyes don't tell us what's necessarily going on right now, at least not the iris. The iris doesn't say what's going on right now, but it shows us what's been inherited from the past 3 to 4 generations. When we combine that with our clients' symptoms and their diet and their lifestyle, we then understand better why they have those symptoms, and we understand the best way to approach the remediation of those symptoms. The constitutional iridology is the foundation for the course that I've developed called Dynamic Iridology. Constitutional iridology teaches us that the iridology does not give us the answers. It tells us what questions to ask. That is exciting. When you understand your anatomy and physiology, and you understand the iridology, you start to be able to put them together to understand what questions you need to be asking your client. Other iris and sclera changes may continue to become visible with time, revealing areas that may need support. So where the iris can change, it doesn't change in response to what we are doing. And what it typically does is it accumulates pigments. It doesn't disperse pigments. We don't move fiber structure that's already genetically determined. That fiber is there. Background information is important. Readings are not done cold. Constitutional iridology is truly holistic. It involves the client. We need to have that conversation with the client. All right, that's all the history. That was the whirlwind tour of history. Now let's do what you really wanted to do, and that's look at eyes. Sound good? Who wants to look at some eyes? Give me an eyes in the comments box if you want to look at some eyes. Fantastic. This is so good. And again, just that little heads up, the more you play with me in the chat box, the more information you're going to get out of me. We are going to look at eye anatomy, but we're also going to be looking at eyes, and then we're going to do some case studies and show you exactly how it is that iridology is an assessment tool. I'll walk you through the process I use in my clinic with my clients. So the first thing we need to know, especially if we're working off photographs, which you won't be if your client is, sitting right across from you, but you need to know how to tell if it's a right eye or a left eye. The way you tell is the pupil is never in the center of the iris. It might be really close to the center, but it's never in the absolute dead center of the iris. And so, because it's never centered, it's off center, and you're looking for which is the narrower side of the iris. So when we look at this image on the left of your screen, and we see that the narrow side of the iris is to the right of the pupil to the right, this is narrow, that means it's a right eye. So the narrow side names the eye. All right, this is the person's left eye. Notice that the left side of the iris is narrower. That means this is a left eye. Does that make sense for everyone? Was that new for anyone? If that was new for anyone, give me new in the comments box. And that's not meant to embarrass anyone. I just want to make sure that everybody is good here. If that was new, give me new. If it makes sense, give me a makes sense. And that was new for some of you. Excellent. And it makes sense. This is good. This is good. You can talk about that over dinner tonight. It's a little interesting tidbit. You're welcome. Okay. Lakita says, so new. Love it, Lakita. So new. All right. Let's look at the structure of the eye. So when we are doing iridology, we need to know what we're looking at. The eyeball is actually the nerve receptor for the optic nerve. This is the largest nerve receptor in your body. So that means that the eyeball itself is an extension of the nervous system. It develops embryologically at the same time the brain is developing. And since the nervous system knows most, if not all, of what's going on in the body and what the genetic capabilities are in the body, if there's a glitch or an anomaly in the nervous system, it's going to show up as an anomaly in the iris. When we are looking at the eye itself, we have two fluid-filled chambers, one here. So we have the cornea, which we'll talk about in a minute, and right behind it, we have the fluid-filled chamber. This is the anterior chamber filled with aqueous humor. We have the posterior chamber, which is filled with vitreous humor. These two chambers are separated by the iris and the lens. Now, the iris is actually a muscular structure, right? And the lens is held in place by this muscular structure we call the iris. The pupil itself, which is right here, this little opening right here, the pupil is the aperture. So if you're familiar with a camera, the aperture is the opening through which that image is reflected onto whatever your developing medium is. And so the pupil is actually a hole, right? So you're looking at something, and as you're looking at it, that image comes through that opening, that pupil. The lens flips the image upside down, it inverts it, and shines that image upside down on the retina. That stimulates the neural receptors in the retina, which sends that stimulated message to the brain, and the brain then can interpret what those messages mean to tell you what you are actually looking at. The entire eyeball itself is encased in a very tough membrane that is made up of two parts. The largest part is called the sclera. This is very tough and it's white. The smaller part is clear and it's called the cornea. So the cornea makes up that clear membrane that holds the fluid in the anterior chamber, and it's all clear so the image can go through the pupil, through the lens to the retina. The optic nerve exits the back of the eyeball, and it actually splits into two separate pathways. One of those pathways goes straight back. The other pathway crosses over to the other side of the brain, and it's that splitting and crossing that gives us depth of field and when we are viewing something. Now what I want to do is take this image. We're going to take this little section, cut this off right here, and flip it on its side. So we're going to look at this section as a cross section of the iris. Okay, so this is really important stuff. Here's that cross section of the iris. The pupil would be sitting here. This is the iris, and over here we would have sclera. So this is just one half of one side of the iris. Is everybody clear as to what we're looking at here? And I asked that because I saw diagrams like this for 30 years before I figured out what they were. So just want to make sure that you understand this. Jack says she gets this. Jack, if you didn't get this, we'd be having a conversation. Everybody getting that this is this piece of the iris right there. Okay, I can't go on till I know that more than my graduates know what we're talking about here, what they're looking at. Does that make sense? Lakita's got this. Good job, Lakita. And Allison's got this. Fantastic. Fantastic. And Linda's got this. Wonderful. Good. I feel like we can move on with this. So good. So good. So we have the anterior border layer. That is this very front layer. This is the layer that holds the pigment. If you have a brown eye, this is where the pigment is. If you have a blue eye, you don't have much pigment. What you're seeing is sort of the natural color of the iris tissues. And so not much pigment in here. It's going to mean you've got a blue eye. Lots of pigment in here. It means you have a brown eye. Then we have the stroma. That is this bulk of tissue in here. And remember, this is just millimeters thick. This is not thick at all. This contains trabecula, which are capillaries that are coated in collagen. It also contains blood vessels and nerves, and it has muscles in it as well. We've got muscles in there that are going to, we'll talk about them because they control the dilation and the constriction of the iris. And that's important because whether the pupil is dilated or constricted is going to alter somewhat what you see, how you perceive things in the iris. We have this posterior membrane. We've got the dilator muscle. This is what opens up the pupil. When this muscle contracts, it squishes this in, it pulls this in, which makes the pupil get bigger. And we also have the sphincter muscle. It goes around that pupillary opening, and when it contracts, it pulls the pupil shut. Okay, we're going to look at that more in a moment, I think. We also have this posterior epithelium. Now, I remember way back in junior high school, it was grade 7, and then probably again in grade 11, in biology class, we did animal eyeball dissections. I think one was a sheep eye and one was a cow eye. And I remember as we opened this eye, seeing that the backside of the iris was black. Our teacher didn't pay any attention to that. You know, he was interested more in where's the sclera, where's the iris, where's the lens, where does the optic nerve leave, you know, where is the retina, really basic stuff. He didn't get into this posterior epithelium. But in sheep and cows and humans, apparently, I don't know what other animals, this posterior epithelium is exactly 2 cell layers thick, and it is black, and it wraps around that inner edge of the eyeball where the pupil is. It is very, very light sensitive. So when this gets enough light on it, it tells the sphincter muscle to constrict, right? Because a lot of light makes your pupil get smaller. When the light is very dim, this tells the dilator muscle to constrict, and as that constricts, it's going to open up the pupil. So we need to know all of these different bits and pieces in order to do iridology well. We also need to be aware that there are layers. This stroma is not just one layer of fiber, it's many layers of fibers. And so when we're looking at an iris and we see these kinds of shapes like this, these are called lacunae. If you're Jensenian, you would call them lesions. We're going to use the constitutional term of lacunae. When we see this, this is an opening in the top layer, at least the top layer of the iris. These fibers are down a layer in the iris. When we have those kinds of lines and fibers in a lacuna, they are not healing lines. They didn't just grow there magically. They've been there all along. They are that layer that is deeper down. When we have an eye where we have darker shading in these shapes, we are looking down even further between more layers of trabeculae, more layers of stroma, down to where we're actually getting shadow, or some people say that even those fibers can be separated so far that you're seeing the posterior epithelium through them. I remember as a Jensenian being taught to call any lines inside a lacuna healing lines, and to go, oh, good for you, you're healing. Never, ever did we have before and after pictures that showed a lacuna that was empty, and then at a later time showed it with fiber in it. Right, so these are not healing lines. They are layers of depth of fiber. The darker we see, the more layers of fiber that are missing or separated, the less resilient that area is. When we see this kind of a white film on the top surface of an eye, this is actually in the cornea. It's not in the iris at all. This is in the cornea. We call it a lipemic diathesis. You'll also see we've got these rings coming around here. I want you to visualize this for a moment. These will never go away. They may sometimes appear lighter and sometimes appear darker, but for a very particular physiological reason. When the pupil is small, the iris tissue is stretched out. And when it is stretched out, these are actually wrinkles in the tissue like we see right here. And so as we stretch the iris fiber out, those wrinkles become flatter, which means more light can hit them. They're going to look lighter. They're not going to look nearly as deep. When we have dim light and this iris gets, or the pupil rather gets huge, that compresses the iris tissue. The iris tissue doesn't telescope like this. It wrinkles like a piece of fabric. If you had a piece of fabric laid on a table and you started squishing it, it would start to get wavy. That's what we're looking at here. So when the pupil gets big, the iris tissue compresses, the fabric of the eye gets wavy, and that can make these contraction furrows look deeper. Whether they're light colored or darker, whether they look shallow or deep, is not a matter of healing. It is a matter of pupil size, and it is a matter of how much light is shining on the eye. So for those of you who are Jensenians, that might be different from what you learned. It certainly is different from what I learned originally. I want to make sure with all of you, does that make sense, what I've just described? If it does, give me rings in the comments box. If that makes sense about the tissue, the iris tissue compressing and stretching, changing how the contraction furrows appear, that makes sense, give me rings. Fantastic. Really excellent. Nice to have the interaction. Thank you so much for letting me know that made sense. So let's just take a look at this again. So we have the sphincter muscle and we have the dilator muscle. So I want you to take a look at how this works. This is the edge of the iris and it is anchored into the sclera. The edge of the constrictor ring or the sphincter muscle anchors into the edge of the dilator muscle. So that means when the sphincter muscle contracts and gets smaller, it is going to, its outer diameter is going to get smaller as well. That's going to pull on this edge of the dilator muscle to stretch it out. When the dilator muscle constricts, it's going to pull on this edge of the sphincter muscle to stretch it out and open things up. Lakita's saying, I purchased a Jensen book from Dr. Robert Morse years ago, but since I've been here, I now know better. I'm so glad about that, Lakita. So glad. So glad. All right. So when we look at this eye and think about what we just talked about with a sphincter muscle and a dilator muscle, what you see right here, this is the sphincter muscle. When we can see it this clearly, that is a different color from the rest of the eye. And when we can see there is a textural difference between this and this, that shows us exactly where that sphincter muscle sits. And when we see the edge of that sphincter muscle that clearly, it teaches us a lot about this person's, particularly their digestive tract. We're not going to get into all of the deep details on that, but it gives us a lot of information about their genetic potential, their inherent potential for that digestive tract. And as we ask appropriate questions, we can ascertain or verify whether it's right or not. Remember, this is all genetic potential. This person may have learned at a very young age that he or she, mascara, I haven't had any male clients come in that wear mascara yet, so I know this is a female, that she may have learned at a very young age that if she did certain things, if she ate certain things, if she didn't get enough rest or whatever, she felt a certain way and it wasn't how she wanted to feel. So she might have wanted instead to feel better. So she figured out what her body needed. she was able to feed it and help it function better. She hasn't changed her genetic structure or her genetic potential. She is simply helping it to function better within the potential she was born with. So this is not an indication of a specific symptom. It is an indication of a predisposition. And she may be overriding that with her lifestyle. Adrenal things and bronchitis and pulmonary issues. Germaine, I'm not sure what you're doing, what you're referring there, but it's probably a little deeper than we want to get into in this little masterclass we're doing. Those trabeculae that we were talking about, we mentioned earlier, they are capillaries and they are coated with collagen, which makes them look white. This is a super oversimplified diagram, and I totally and readily admit that. What we've got here is an understanding that blood flow in the eye, in these capillaries, that flows towards the collarette. This is the same as this fiber that comes around here. We call this the collarette. So blood flow towards the collarette is arterial flow. Blood flow away from the collarette is venous flow. And so that's just another important little piece of information that we want to have here. We need to remember that iridology is not a crystal ball. We do not use iridology to diagnose, name diseases, or to name cures. We use it to guide our client sessions, to help us understand why our client has the symptoms they have, to help us understand the best pathways to help them have better control of their health. I started learning iridology in 1979, and at that stage in time, constitutional iridology had not yet made it to Canada. It was just beginning. It was just the early days of Bill Cardona and Harry Wolf and doing their little things in the States, trying to promote Joseph Deck's work. I studied and embraced Dr. Jensen's work. It was all we had. And I loved the idea that I could maybe understand the body, that I could see inside the body. But what I've discovered after about 5 years wasn't working the way I was taught it would work. I was putting people on cleanses. We weren't seeing changes in their eyes. They were feeling better. That was good, but we weren't seeing the changes in their eyes that I had been taught they would see. So I stuck with it for a few more years. 10 years in, I was at the point where I was going, forget this. I'm not going to do this anymore. I don't think it works, and I don't want anything to do with it. But that's when I had the opportunity. That's when I learned about constitutional. With Jensen, I would look in an eye like this. And for those of you who have studied Jensen, I want you to see if this rings true. I was taught that every one of these lacunae, or lesions as you would call them, was a pathological problem that was happening now. And that if we did the right things, we could shrink or get rid of all of these things. We were taught that if we had a fiber that was doing interesting things, skittering off, and we did all the right things, we could straighten them out. We could totally change what this eye looks like. If this eye had extra pigment in it, we could fast or cleanse those pigments out. And we knew we were having success when these eyes changed color or when they cleared up. In this case, this eye, we would be getting rid of these little white clouds. We would be getting rid of the lacunae. And that was how we were gauging our success. We were watching for healing lines, which never seemed to change. And so it got really, really frustrating. In constitutional iridology, when I started learning that, I knew there had to be another way. I heard about this, I reached out, I started studying it, and I learned that the lacunae are inherited. These show us the potentials that have been passed down from the past 3 to 4 generations. When we see an eye like this that has so many lacunae, each one of these is not necessarily uniquely important. We want to look at them together as a constitution. And in this case, it suggests that this person has a greater risk of endocrine imbalances. So specifically, our most common ones would be for, if this is a woman, don't remember if it's a woman or a man. If it was a woman, we would be thinking thyroid, adrenal, pancreas, blood sugar, reproductive, right? We would be thinking primary endocrine. And then we would be listening for what are the client's symptoms? What does the client want help with? How does what I see in the eyes support or explain why my client has these symptoms? And then from there, I could, again, look at the eyes, assess their diet, assess their lifestyle, assess supplements they were taking, and figure out where do we need the greatest support? What is going to have the biggest impact to help this person bring their system back into balance to help them get results? Taking the pressure away, we're not trying to change the eyes. We are trying to improve the client's health, right? And that was such a turning point for me. We also know that people who have lots of lacunae are very creative. What is this person doing to honor their creativity? If they're not doing anything, how would honoring their creativity actually contribute to their wellness? So we begin to look at the eye in a much more holistic way rather than one lacuna means a particular single problem. How does that resonate with you? The idea of taking that step back and looking at the eye as a whole initially. Eventually we do dissect it a little bit or a lot depending on the client, but initially looking at the eye as a whole to get a feel and an understanding of how this person is generally put together. How does that resonate with you? Does that feel comfortable? Or does that feel like, oh, I need a whole lot more detail? Let me know in the chat box. Lakita says it makes sense. Thank you for that, Lakita. Anybody else want to weigh in? Peggy says it's comfortable. Excellent. Debbie says both, comfortable and uncomfortable. That's a fair assessment, especially if it's new information. Yeah, especially if it's new information. Thank you, Debbie, for sharing that. Appreciate that. Let's do a little case study. We've got several eye sets to look at tonight. So this is Michelle. And we're going to look at her eyes with two different types of lighting because I want you to see how lighting makes the difference in how you see things and how you assess things. So Michelle came to me wanting to have a baby. She and her husband had been trying for a year. They'd had no luck. Her husband's semen analysis appeared to be fine. So he didn't think he needed to come in and have any help. So that was fine. Michelle was willing to come in. As we were talking, we talked about her menstrual cycles and she had a period every 28 days. And she described the flow as a smear on the tissue. She didn't even bother to use any sanitary protection because it was just a smear on the tissue. And so she also had no ovulatory mucus. So I'm thinking, there's a lot of red flags here that her doctors haven't clued in on yet. I want you to notice that she has many lacunae attached to her collarette. This tells me she's polyglandular. So just like we just mentioned, it suggests a general predisposition. And at this stage, I would describe it as a non-specific endocrine imbalance. We haven't gone deep enough, but I know that's where I'm looking. Again, our most common issues here would be for endocrine: blood sugars, adrenals, thyroid, reproductive, and could be any or all of those. Now, I want you to look carefully at these wrinkles. We talked about these earlier, contraction furrows. Look at how prominent they appear now or how unprominent they appear using frontal lighting. When we go to side lighting, can you see how much deeper these contraction furrows look? It is so very important when we're doing iridology to use a variety of lighting so that we can make features pop so we can see them more clearly. So these contraction furrows became more prominent, which tells me that nervous system wise, she is sympathetic dominant, which means she burns through her B vitamins really, really quickly. Now, I also noted she had tiny little pigment here in her left eye in what we would consider to be that's zone 1, 2, because her nutritive zone is quite narrow. And another little pigment here as well. She's got a couple of little pigments in her eyes, which suggests to me that she might have the MTHFR anomaly. Now, I'm not saying she does, but it suggests she might. So right from the get-go, we used a prenatal vitamin that had methylated Bs. I asked her about her diet. It was clean. She was eating organically from scratch, good choices, but there was not enough protein and not enough fat. She was living on organic carbohydrates and low carb vegetables. Her body was saying, you're not getting enough calories or nutrition to support a baby, so I'm not going to let you get pregnant, right? Then I asked her about stress because she has these wrinkles, and these again tell us that she internalizes her stress. And she's high stress. Her job was a very high stress job. So again, high stress means burn through B vitamins really, really quickly. Well, we were taking care of that with the prenatal vitamin that we were using that had the methylated B vitamins in it. Because we see this little bit of a pigment in here, I knew we wanted to support liver. I like N-acetylcysteine for that. And I knew she wasn't getting enough fats in her diet, so I gave her a fairly stiff dose of omega-3. We also very specifically selected a few herbs, some to use in the follicular phase of her cycle before ovulation, and then we would change completely to use different ones in the luteal phase after ovulation. We did that for a few months, and it only took about 3 or 4 months to where she actually called me one day and she said, I had to go and buy some sanitary pads because I actually have a flow today. And it's like, yes, we are winning. We are rebalancing your hormones and getting you where you need to be. We kept working, and about 6 months after we started working together, she had a positive pregnancy test. Now, she internalizes her stress. She is a nervous Nelly. If you know anything about people who maybe have MTHFR, they tend to have a lot more anxiety. And so at about 4 months, someone convinced her, and it wasn't me, to do 23andMe. I would definitely not have advised her to do that during pregnancy, just because I knew how she would react if there was something that came up that was not totally balanced. Well, something came up that was not totally balanced. She sent me an email, and I was pretty sure my computer was going to explode with the vibration of the energy that she had in that email. It was really intense. She had tested positive for one of the 23andMe anomalies. Go figure. And she was so anxious. Have I hurt my baby? Is my baby going to be okay? And I was able to say to her, Michelle, first thing is take a deep breath. Second thing is, I suspected this all along. I've had your back. You know those special prenatal vitamins I've got you on? Those are specifically because I suspected you had this problem. So I'm not worried about it. Your next homework is, even though you're only like 4 months pregnant, I want you to stand up right now and start dancing with your baby and singing to your baby. And when you get home from work tonight, I want you to put out all the books, all the storybooks, the baby storybooks from the nursery. And I want you to start reading to your baby. And I want you to start enjoying this pregnancy because I've got your back, right? So that's what she did. She ended up with a beautiful baby boy. In my early iridology training, and let's see if this resonates with any of you, I was taught that an eye that had this kind of uneven pigment was toxic, that they were full of toxins and they needed to be cleansed. And if we cleansed them enough, those eyes would turn blue. Any of you hear that? If you've ever heard that, give me the word toxic in the chat box. Let me know that that's what you've seen and heard. Have you heard that from anybody, that these eyes are toxic, you need to cleanse? Yep. Hi, Angie, good to see you. What about the methylation in this case? Methylation could be an issue here as well. And depending on the client, you know, we may work with a supplement, or we may work more with diet. I knew we needed to work with a supplement with Michelle. So these eyes do not say she needs cleansing. These eyes do not say this person is toxic. You know, there were teachers who taught me who had before and after pictures that looked convincing. And again, lesions maybe looked smaller, sort of. The eyes maybe looked bluer, sort of. But I didn't know anything about photographic technology back then. And now what I know is that the camera or the lighting or the room lighting all affect the image. They all affect the output. So the only way you can possibly hope to do an accurate before and after study is if you use the exact same camera with the exact same lighting setup in a room that has the consistent lighting from one time of photos to the next. You can't have a window in that room unless you can block that light out completely, right? Because all of that will affect the output. Even to do photographic prints, no better, because different brands of film, different brands of paper change the output. And we know that. We know that back when I used to shoot film, we knew that Fuji shot green. We knew that Kodak shot a little red, right? And so we knew we had to account for that. And we knew that the paper it was printed on made a difference. So as my frustration grew, I was getting ready to walk away from iridology because it wasn't working. And you know, that was when I started studying things. So a couple of comments here. I've heard that under brown eyes are blue, and cleansing would either make them clearer or darker. Brown eyes are stronger. No, 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 no. From the perspective of the pigment you see on the eye is genetically determined. And so you are right that everything under there would be blue, but you can't strip that color off genetically. You can't cleanse it away. Angie says it's so hard when people get excited that their eyes changed color, or they send them to you and one eye is frontlit and one is sidelit, and you just have to sigh. This is so true. So true. The lighting makes the difference, whether it's frontlit, sidelit, you know, and again, is it an incandescent light on the camera the first time? Is it an LED light the second time? Because that's going to change the output. What color are the walls in the room where the photos are being taken? Did they move to a different room with different wall colors? That's going to change it too. And so it's really, really hard. So this eye in constitutional iridology is one where the liver and the kidneys dominate the chemistry. This one has a sympathetic nervous system response. Again, we're seeing that in these rings that come around. We've got the darker area in zone 1 and zone 2, which is teaching us about which organs want to affect the stomach and the intestinal tract. We know that from all of this in here that this person is prone to holding on to stress, and we know that stress affects digestion. So we need to know what the client's diet and lifestyle are like. We need to know what is the client doing for their health. These answers determine how we approach this eye. Peggy said she had a lady that has one blue eye and one brown eye. And that can happen. That is very rare, but it can happen. And sometimes the eye that looks brown is actually not brown. It's actually blue, but it has some brown pigment thrown unevenly on top. So that's another thing to consider. And Lakita's giving a genetics lesson. Thank you, Lakita. Absolutely, because blue is a recessive gene. So we can identify markings, but it's not a case that one marking equals one problem, right? Instead, we need to have that solid understanding of anatomy and physiology and how the organs work together or how they work against each other when they're out of balance. And we need context. We need to understand what the client's symptoms are, what they want our help with. We need to understand their health history. We need to understand the family health history. And from there, then the iris and the sclera can help us understand why the client has the symptoms they've got, and it can help us understand how best to address this. Jack says, my brother has 2 different color eyes, but like you said, he had more pigment in the one eye. Absolutely. Absolutely. So here, let's look at this client. Let's do another case study. You want to do another case study? Give me case in the chat box if you want another case study. While you're giving me that, yeah, you're getting fast. You're getting fast. This is great. This is a client who's been with me for over 40 years. Okay, now that's called longevity, right? When she was in the last time, we sat for a moment and chuckled over what baby was she having and what baby was I having when we first met. And we were able to figure out about 40 years ago. So she is well trained. She has herbal training. She has nutrition training. She really is a smart cookie and she knows her stuff. At the time, and my clients will come in for 4 or 5 appointments, like about a month apart for a while, and then they're in a good place, so they disappear for a few years, 4 or 5, 6 years, and then they're getting older, they've forgotten what they should be doing, they're starting to fall apart again. That's when they book to come back in. We'll do another series of 4 or 5 appointments, get them back on track, send them on their way, and we just keep rinsing and repeating that cycle. So the most recent time that she started coming back was just 3 or 4 years ago. She's in her late 60s by then, mid 60s by then. And she was coming in because, yeah, things were not quite doing what she wanted them to do. She had gained weight. She had elevated blood pressure. Her cholesterol and triglycerides were up, and her hemoglobin A1C was up. I strongly recommend that if you're not familiar with lab tests, that you should get a really good lab manual. So when your clients bring in test results, you can study up and understand what those tests were designed to discover and what the results could mean. Now, again, her eyes are not really an absolute true brown, and we know that. So she falls into that biliary category. They do not show toxicity. They show inherent potential. We can see a milky film towards the edge of the eye. And again, that is something she has actually put there under genetic influence. Okay, so because we have worked together off and on for so many decades, and I know she's well read, I was able to go pretty deep. She actually knows some iridology as well, so we could dive pretty deep. Constitutionally, we want to be, with what her eyes are saying, we need to be paying attention to how her liver is impacting things, how her digestion is impacting things, and how her sympathetic dominant nervous system is impacting things. And so what we did in that first visit, again, I got pretty heavy-handed with her because I know she knows better. And she really just needed someone to give her that big push. I pushed her harder than I would push most people on a first appointment because this was not her very first time with me. So we did low carb, high protein, and we got her using more and better fat choices. Ketogenic, almost sort of keto-ish, but not full-on keto. Also pushed her to be getting 30 minutes of walking every day, right? Because the doctor had already said, you're going to end up on all of these medications if you don't get this under control. And this client is going, no, I'm not. I'll get this under control. Good answer. Let's work hard. Let's get it done. So she did that. She dropped the carbs way, way down. The simple carbs, she was using complex carbs. She got more protein. She got better fats and more fats. She did start walking 30 minutes a day. We gave her omega-3 fatty acids, quite a heavy amount of that. We used a product called Berberin IR. We worked on her gut biome. We also gave her some hydrochloric acid to help with her protein digestion. We gave her a broad spectrum digestive enzyme to help with her digestion of her carbs and her fats. And we got her to start eating protein and vegetables for breakfast. That's one of my mantras, protein and veggies, right? And so in the first 3 months, she lost 20 pounds. 20 pounds. All of her other numbers were coming into range, and her doctor was going, holy doodle, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Keep doing it. You're on the right track. Go you. And we're going, yes, yes. So she was doing really well, and then some family stress hit. Now, remember, she is sympathetic dominant, which means she internalizes the stress. As she internalized the stress, it kind of made her slip off her program. And she was off her program for several months, and then she had a heart attack. Okay, so I got a phone call from her about 2 weeks later. She had survived it. This was great. Her husband has worked in industry had retired, but had worked in industry and had CPR first aid and recognized this is a heart attack. And they live about 3 minutes away from a hospital. He said, I know if I call for an ambulance, it's a 30-minute wait. So he literally scooped her up, threw her in the car, took her straight to the hospital. And that probably is what had a part of what gave her such a good outcome. So immediately after the heart attack, she found herself on 9 different medications because that's what the medical treadmill does. Now, her family stress, and so she's been on those 9 meds for a few years now, and we keep trying to get her to do the homework, and she does a little bit, and then the family stress hits again. But we're working on it. We're working really hard to get her back on track with her foods, to get her back to where she's taking care of herself, getting her daily physical activity. And when we get her there, she starts to take off the weight again. And we know it's going to take time because there's so much emotional stuff going on for her right now. But her doctor has agreed that if she can get things under control, he'll start talking with her about which medications can they safely reduce and still protect the heart muscle, and how do we work on things, right? So yeah, so Patricia's asking, how do we know she's sympathetic dominant? And it's the contraction furrows. That always means sympathetic dominant. Okay, so that's where we're at with her, is still working to give her back control over her foods and her exercise, her physical activity, so that we can start regaining the successes that she had and get her numbers back on track. In old iridology, again, I learned that every lacuna, every lesion was a problem that could be healed. We learned that every pigment could be cleansed out. And then I learned constitutional iridology. Back then, there were no books. There are still not any really good books in English on constitutional. And but Harry Wolf and Bill Cardona had produced some VHS videos, which I was able to purchase. And as I studied them, they just made sense. Made sense that the structure of the iris and the pigments we see in the iris are passed down from generation to generation. They show us that inherent predisposition, that inherent potential. And it shows us where we need to do ongoing support to help keep those organs strong, to help them function to the best of their ability. Again, constitutional iridology teaches us to look for patterns and to understand the interrelationship of organs. And if the person's already doing things that are supporting areas that are not as robust, they may not have any symptoms. They may be doing what they need to do to protect their health, but those marks and those pigments will still be there. And that's okay, because those marks and those pigments will remind us that we need to keep working. We need to be vigilant. So this person may have issues with connective tissue. That's what this kind of a structure suggests. There might be some issues with kidney, some potential issues with kidney. There might be some potential issues with liver. And so we need to understand, what does the client want help with? How are these things showing up in the person's health? And how does that help us determine what we can recommend for this client? From that perspective, the same marking can mean different things in different contexts. It's not one marking means one thing. Constitutional gives us flexibility to assess the eye on an individual basis, not on a cookie cutter program. So again, here we have another one of my clients. We'll do a quick iris assessment here. Again, we see that with old iridology, it would have said headed for nervous breakdown. That's what the Jensenian that I learned was 3 consecutive complete rings means heading into a nervous breakdown or just coming out of one. We now know that's not true. It said that these lines meant this person has parasites, and when we cleanse the parasites out, those lines are going to disappear. We now know that is not true. This is the eye of an Asian woman who was in her mid-30s. I do a lot of fertility work. She was struggling with fertility. So again, when I see these contraction furrows, I know I'm going to need to pad up her B vitamins, right? I know I'm going to need to pad up her folic acid. When I see even a tiny brown pigment like this, I'm thinking, methylate that folic acid. Let's give her the methylated B9, right? And so we did all of that. Now, she also has the beginning of a lipemic diathesis. She's in her mid-30s. What does that tell me? It tells me liver enzymes are likely out of balance. What does that do? That can also affect blood sugar levels. Oh, okay. MTHFR possibly, so methylation issues, possible blood sugar imbalance. That suggests to me possibly PCOS. So I asked her, asked her, how far apart are your periods? 90 days. Well, that's a hallmark of PCOS. Have the doctors ever mentioned anything about blood sugars? Oh yeah, they say I'm type 2 diabetic. That would have been good to lead with, right? And so as we figured out PCOS, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetic, we were able to do the right things with her nutrition. She had a very high carb diet. She was not overweight. Fixed the diet, got the supplements into her that she needed, got her menstrual cycles down to 35 days. Now we've got a fertile cycle. Got her ovulating really well. She conceived. Did take 1.5 years to get her to where she could conceive. She delivered a beautiful baby boy in a 3-hour start to finish labor and delivery. Her body was meant to do pregnancy well and to do delivery well. She did not develop gestational diabetes. The doctors had told her, well, you're type 2 diabetic. You will absolutely have gestational diabetes. She did never, ever, ever develop that. We regulated her foods, kept those her activities and her supplements, and kept her blood sugar so stable. They absolutely could not believe how well she did. So again, it's a matter of working it through, right? Working it through. Here's a gentleman. He's in his mid-60s. He had been a client of mine many years ago, came back to me after a 6-year absent, 5'11", weighs 175 pounds. He had recently been to his doctor, and that's why he was coming to me now. His hemoglobin A1C was 7.2, which is, like 1.5 points higher than we want it to be. His glomerular, I always have problems with that word, glomerular filtration rate was 61, which is bordering on a problem because the lowest we want it is 60. So that's telling us kidneys are struggling. His potassium was slightly low. And so could it be partially because of the medications he'd started with the doctor? The doctor had already determined with that hemoglobin A1C that this fellow was pre-diabetic. His blood sugars were also sitting high between 6.8 and 7.5. So you stack that on top of a hemoglobin A1C of 7.2, we've got a problem. So the doctor had him on metformin, which gave him diarrhea, switched him to a combination of Glumetza and Giardians. He was on hydrochlorothiazide, which is a diuretic for the blood pressure. He was on Trandolapril for the cholesterol. He was on sildenafil, which is Viagra, which he had to do because of a side effect of the blood pressure medication. And he was on Mylan torvastatin for the cholesterol. And he came in saying, I don't want to be on all these drugs. I'm only 64. And my answer is, go you. You don't want to be on those drugs when you're 94. And I can't tell you to come off them, but I can sure help you strengthen your body. While he was with me, I noticed a lot of throat clearing, right? Constantly, which makes me wonder, does he have acid reflux? Interesting. His diet before we started working would be breakfast was a cinnamon bun or muffins or Cheerios. Anyone see any problems with that? Lunch would be a sandwich on white bread with sandwich meat or tuna or maybe egg salad. Well, maybe the tuna or the egg salad would be decent. And supper was often fast food like a pizza or meat and potatoes or meat and pasta. So not great. He would drink 3 liters of water a day. So that was his real claim to fame. Notice in his eyes, he's beginning to develop a lipemic diathesis, which tells us liver enzymes and suggests it could go cholesterol, triglyceride, blood sugars, or all three. We see that he has a stomach ring, which says not digesting proteins very well. And we see that his cholerate is atonic, which means that he probably has a very sluggish bowel. And as we talked about gassiness, he has what we call carb farts, right? The gas that he passes is slightly sweet-ish, which means he's not digesting his carbs well. And if you notice, he's got those contraction furrows again. All right, so we suggested that he do some radical food changes again. He knows what he's supposed to do. We started doing it 6 years ago, but he's forgotten, thought he could get away with it, whatever. So protein and veggies for breakfast. An apple with some good clean nut butter for a snack in the morning, preferably a sour apple. Lunch, large salad with real meat. So a big salad with a chicken breast or a big salad with a piece of steak or a piece of fish. Supper, protein and veggies. And again, what can you do with that? So we talked it through. Could you make a stew? Could you make a stir fry? What about roasted veggies and grilled meat? Talk them through these things, because if you say protein and veggies, I guarantee what they see in their mind is a plate with a piece of protein and 3 piles of veggies. And they think, I can do that 2 nights a week, but for 7 nights a week, that's boring. So you have to help them think it through. We also talked about portion size, because like some men, he liked to overeat. So first thing is chew your food. That was my first piece of advice. And with that, then we added some L-arginine, which is an NO2 stimulant, and it helps to vasodilate, which can help to reduce the blood pressure, and some berberine IR, which is helpful with regulating blood sugars. Also suggested he needed to be walking twice a day for 30 minutes each day. Pretty easy to do. He's a security guard, and for 1 week of shifts, he's out walking the perimeter of the yard, if you will. The other week, he's indoors on the computer monitors. So we had to get pretty creative with how do you get your walking in then. In follow-up appointments, we added digestive supports, hydrochloric acid, and a garden essence enzyme, which again helps with carbs and fats. And over the course of a few months, we were able to get his blood pressure down. Now, admittedly, he was still on blood pressure meds, down and controlled to about an average of 118/74, which is nice, really nice. We were able to get his blood sugars down to between 5.9 and 6.3, which is really pretty darn good. And we got his hemoglobin A1C down to 5.9. So next appointment after that, I suggested adding stretchy bands for resistance training, especially for the weeks that he's in the computer room doing the computer monitors for security. Now you can spend a half hour doing stretchy band while you're staring at computers. That's what I call really using your time well. Over the course of the 2 years that we've been working together, we have done a good enough job regulating his blood sugars that the doctor has removed the giardians and the glumetza. completely gone. Yay. His triglycerides are coming down nicely, his blood pressure meds are being reduced, and his cholesterol meds are being reduced as well. So again, when we look at his eyes and we see the stomach ring, we see this collarette that is sitting way out here that suggests sluggish elimination, sluggish assimilation, lots of sluggishness in the intestinal tract. We know we've got to work on the digestive areas of his body. Now, in these images, you can't see some other markings that I could see as we do other angles on the eye. For example, there was some slight yellowing in the sclera, which suggests liver, that we needed to do some liver work. The contraction furrows suggest he internalizes his stress. And we have some tiny, tiny pigments. There's a tiny pigment right here, which again suggests that he may not methylate well. So we needed to do the methylated Bs with him. That little bit of a lipemic diathesis or corneal arcus, again, suggesting liver, triglycerides, cholesterol, blood sugars could be at work. And so, if he's not digesting his carbs well, and excess carb is going into things like cholesterol and blood sugar imbalance, well, we've got to tie all of that together to come up with our programs, right? Angie says, I see here the throat clearing often. Yeah, 9 times out of 10, my experience has been that is because the stomach has not enough acid, right? And that low acid, it feels like acid reflux, but it's really not high acid, it's low acid. And so we deal with that, and that throat clearing disappears. Chana says chewing food is so important. What about though a person who has no teeth, hasn't for 7 years, and won't get dentures? Digestion has very much affected what I've seen in their eyes, stomach ring. And so then they're going to have foods that are primarily steamed, and they're going to have to gum that food well, chew it with their gums, right? Because it has to be chewed well. You're absolutely right, Chana. So that leads me to wanting to introduce you to the Dynamic Iridology Assessment System program, which is the only online live, fully mentored course for nutritionists, herbalists, naturopaths, RNs, NDs, RMTs, EMTs, RDHs, you name it, who want to streamline their clinical work without sacrificing client care. And you want to have this because it will help you to stop working unpaid overtime, for developing your client programs, for assessing what they need. It'll help you to create programs that are concise, precise, that you can build on step by step, which will help your clients to be more compliant if the programs are easy to follow. And it will lead to long-term retention. You've seen clients here that I've worked with for up to 40 years. So if you want to learn more than just iris markers, and I love what Jack says, Jack Stegman, definitely recommend this course. Yes, she is one of my certified grads. Thanks for that, Jack. I appreciate that. If you want to learn more than just iris markers, if you want to learn how the markers play off each other, if you want to learn how the organs work together or against each other, if you want to be mentored in creating programs for your clients, and if you want that support long-term, even after the course is done, then we need to have a conversation, you and me, one-on-one. The Dynamic Iridology Assessment System course is where I teach constitutional iridology and how to integrate it with nutrition, with herbology, and with the training you already have, so that you can create these logical sequential programs for your client, built from one appointment to the next. So you can learn how to do this without diagnosing disease, regardless of what you've seen on social media. This will help you stay within your scope of practice. It'll also help to teach you how to assess your clients quickly and accurately. It's also designed to give you all of the curriculum you need and all of the required mentoring should you decide to certify with the International Iridology Practitioners Association. That is really important, that you know that I did not mean to do that. Just a moment. I clicked a button and my computer developed a mind of its own. There we go. Really important for you to know that not all teachers actually include the mentoring for certification. most of them don't include long-term support either. And so these are really important. Oh, darn it, did it again. These are really important features that you need to be aware of so that you can choose the course that will best meet your own needs. So let's talk about this for just a bit here. The next course starts on November 1st. The course time is from 5 till 7:15 Mountain Time. So the first lesson is Mountain Daylight Time, and the second lesson were Mountain Standard Time. So if you've already completed a college level anatomy and physiology course, and you want to learn iridology at a clinical level, and by that I mean, again, learning more than just markers, actually learning how to use this thing, then we need to have a chat. And we need to schedule that chat. I'm going to put this in the chat box. You use this link to schedule a one-on-one Zoom meeting with me. Now, the purpose of this meeting is not to strong arm you into anything. It is for us to talk about where you're at in learning iridology, where you're at with your business, and to talk about the vision you have for adding iridology to your practice, to what you do with your clients. If you and I decide together that this is a good fit, I will give you the enrollment link and I will invite you to enroll. If I do not think it's a good fit for any reason, I will coach you based on my 40 years of experience in the industry. I will help you find the right path to get you where you want to go. Maybe you don't have anatomy and physiology and I need to send you to an A&P class course before I bring you into dynamic iridology. Maybe I've had some people who wanted to learn this, but they weren't going to be willing to invest in the right kind of equipment afterwards. Well, that's okay if you can do face-to-face work, but you've got to know that it's the right fit for you, because I don't want you spending time or money on a course that you're going to drop out of. So what does this course include? Now, this is really important because not everybody includes the same things in their course. So the first thing I want you to know is that I only take a maximum of 10 students per class, per cohort rather. Many iridology instructors will teach 20, 30, 40 people. And I don't see how you can teach that many people and make sure they're learning it well. I keep my classes small. The course itself is 20 2.25-hour live webinar classes that are each recorded for playback on demand. So we do it over Zoom just like this. The big difference is you would have your microphone and your camera turned on so that we could be having conversations back and forth. We also, Peggy says, Judith is hands-on and you do learn it very well with her. Thank you for that, Peggy. Oh, I hit the wrong button again. Okay, we're going to get this right, folks. There we go. Okay, and so we do learn the nuts and bolts. You learn how to identify markers, but you also practice. We practice in class together, understanding what the markers mean, how they work together, how you would formulate the kinds of questions you would need to ask your client, how you would formulate a program, and we lean on your previous training. So if your previous specialty is nutrition, then when we're practicing, I want you to give me nutrition answers. If your training is herbs, I want you to give me herbal answers. We had a physical therapist. She gave me physical therapy answers, right? And that's how I teach you to integrate this with what you already do. I've had so many students come to me who have, thanks for being here, Peggy, who have studied with other teachers, but they didn't get that practical kind of training. And they've ended up enrolling in my program to get that training. We do live group mentoring twice each month via webinar office hours. And that is really important because that means that, that you bring cases, you bring questions to the session. We talk about them, you assess them, you tell us what you know, you assess it as far as you can. We ask you questions, we make you think it through, we give you ideas for how to think it through. So as we do that, then it helps you to get a clearer vision of what you need to be doing, of how this works for you. We have a student and alumni MeWe group. So we have a private social media group where you can, again, post questions. You can post cases. We post interesting things about iridology there. This is where you get more support between classes, after classes. Oh, by the way, with the live mentoring, you don't get kicked out of that. Once you've graduated from the course, even if you've certified with IPA, you are welcome to continue coming back to the live mentoring as often and as much as you need to. My gift to you is a 225-page digital textbook. I've kept my textbook digital, downloadable, because periodically it gets tweaked. Right now, we're in the process of tweaking it. And you will always have access to the most recent version of the textbook without buying another one, right? So I just let you know the new one's been uploaded. I tell you where it is, and you can go in and download the update, even if you studied with me 5 years ago, right? I think that's really important because information changes. 45 pages of digital study notes called the cheat sheets. This is the whole course in charts and tables distilled down into 45 pages. And IPA requires a certain level of mentoring to prepare you for the final exam and for certification. I include that mentoring as my gift to you for up to 10 months after you finish your last class with me. Right now, I give it that 10-month deadline because you want to do your certification while this stuff is fresh in your mind. You don't want to wait 2 or 3 years, because if you wait 2 or 3 years, you'll have forgotten a lot of what you're going to need for that final exam. So I push you, I invite you to get it done quickly. If you're going to take longer than that, you can certainly buy an extension and take longer than that if you need to. So here's what some of my students have said. Sophia Perez Villar said this. I'm going to skip through part of this. She says, as this was my second iridology course, I was not sure if the course would be an add-on, but it has exceeded my expectations. I've learned lots from this course, material and classes. It's expanded previous knowledge and gained more confidence. I can now see how this course has helped me to get better answers from my clients and design effective protocols in very little time. Highly recommended for beginners and advanced. Kimberly Zadalis, who's got more alphabet behind her name than I can even remember. Has a master's degree in radiology. She works in a radiology imaging clinic, but she's also trained in Eastern and Western medicine. And so she says, I personally practice both Eastern and Western physiology medicine and was very impressed with the layout of the program. She makes it easy for her students to balance work, life, and study. Sharon Bimrose says, I'd already taken iridology as a part of my studies as a naturopath. However, Judith's course, Dynamic Iridology, survived my previous training in structured content delivery and documentation and support. And so I love that she really felt like it helped her organize her information and gave structure to what she already knew, which is so good, so good. So again, I invite you, if you are interested in learning more about the tuition, more about what's in this course, is it a good fit for you? And if you've already got the anatomy and physiology course as a standalone course, maybe it was a part of a nutrition program, but it shows separately on transcript, I encourage you to go ahead and book a call with me. And Angie is saying, I definitely encourage anyone not on the fence to go ahead and book the call with Judith, and she'll help you know if it's right for you. Thanks for that, Angie. That's so good. And I encourage you to book a call with me if you're curious. And if you've already even had a call and you're thinking, yeah, now I'm ready. Now I think I'm ready. Book another call. Let's talk about it. Let's make sure you are. Again, if you need A&P, I'll send you in that direction to get that done, because you have to have it before you come to me. We need that to go as deep as we want to go. My experience has been that when my students haven't had an actual anatomy and physiology course already completed before they came to me, we were too deep for them by the time we got to about the 6th or 7th class, and they dropped out. And that makes me sad. It makes them sad. That's not why I'm teaching. I want you to come in and be successful. So I want you to make sure You've got what you need. Let's make sure that this is the right course for you and that you've got the right prerequisite so that we can make this be a good fit. So I know there was a question about tuition, which we will answer in the calls. I don't answer that here, but if you are seriously considering this and you've got that A&P, schedule a call. Let's have a conversation. Let's see if this is a good fit for you. Are there any calls that are not specifically about the tuition, but that might be about the course that you'd like a little more information about that? If there are, we'll answer those. And if we're done, we're done. Give you just another minute. Again, thank you so much for being with me tonight. I really appreciate that. I appreciate all the interaction, all the things that you answered for me here, all the makes sense and all that kind of stuff. That really helps to fuel me to know that you are there paying attention. Debbie says, thank you. The course is November 1st. It runs for 20 weeks with 1 week off for Christmas. So should be ending end of March, early April. I do not teach naturopathy because I am not a naturopath, but I do teach iridology to naturopaths. I do teach a course called Women's Holistic Health, but we are already halfway through that. And so it won't be coming around again for another year, year and a half. I also teach another course called Body Systems Iridology and Herbology. That is limited to grads of my course because you have to have my iridology for us to go that one level deeper and add a deep level of herbology to it. Lakita, so good to see you today. One of these days, I'm going to see you in my course, right? And Chan, is so good to see you again today. So with that, it looks like we might be done. Again, thank you for being with me. Truly appreciate it. And I look forward to having you, having calls with you to get to know you, to see if this is going to be a good fit for you. And if it's not, to guiding you in a way that would serve you in a better way. Do take care. We will talk to you soon. Bye for now.